Down. Hello, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm just typing. Welcome to another stream tonight. I've got an Azure Greg stream again, so it's been a little while, so I'll probably forget all the buttons and stuff, but not to worry. So tonight I am joined with my good friend Anthony Mashford. Anthony, how are you?
Good evening, mate. I'm very well, thank you. Great to see you again. Been a while.
When's the last time I saw you? That was Ignite. Was that Ignite or the MVP Summit? Sorry,
MVP Summit. Yeah.
How have you been? All good? I hear you're now a grandfather, so congratulations.
Yes, I have. Yeah, thank you. So it's officially
old. How
old.
Do you feel to be a grandfather?
It's old. I keep on offering me pipes and slippers to borrow. So
I was expecting you smoking a pipe tonight.
It's fabulous. Yeah, it's wonderful. To see essentially the first edition of the next generation. Very proud grandfather.
Yeah. Hi, Ahmed. Good morning. I know you're in New Zealand, so good morning from myself and Anthony. Anthony, for people who don't know who you are, give us a little bit of background about who Anthony Mashford is and what do you do?
So I'm Anthony. I'm a cloud solution architect. I'm part of the NetApp Azure Business Group. It's a bit of a strange one. So even I work for it, I'm paid by NetApp. I'm actually all about Azure. I've been with NetApp just over 2 years. I've been working in Azure since 2012 and full time since 2014. So really, my history has been, for the last decade or so, has been Azure, with a little bit of consulting back then because I was a consultant engineer and stuff. And then I now do pre-sales, so I essentially talk a good game. And that's been my world for the best part of almost 10 years now, really, sort of pre-sales. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. So tonight I want to ask you all about NetApp files because I know absolutely nothing about NetApp files. So let's start with the easy questions. What is Azure NetApp files and why would I want to use it? Let's start with that.
Okay, so maybe we start what it is and then maybe why it exists. So Azure NetApp files, the headline is high performance, low latency, file-based storage, which you can consume within Azure on demand. That's essentially the upshot of what it is.
Yeah.
Why it exists, really. So actually, Azure NetApp files, or ANF as we refer to it, it's been around since it went GA in May 2019. And back then, and previous to ANF's existence, one of the challenges, of which there's been a few over the years, for instance, networking being one of them, but was storage and storage performance. So customers looking to move out of the data center, so off premises, into Azure, the workloads that were running on premises were reliant on these high performance storage support from NetApp, as an example.
Yeah.
And Microsoft sort of obviously identified that this was a requirement. And I don't know the whole backstory because I'm not part of the product group, but essentially there was conversations and a partnership struck up between Microsoft and NetApp to essentially bring the NetApp capability, which stems over 30 years. So NetApp has a lineage of over 30 years now in delivering file-based services into the Azure ecosystem. But I think the most important point, and even though I say this probably 3 or 4 times a day and people don't get it, Azure NetApp Files is a Microsoft first-party service. Yes, it has NetApp's name, but it's actually delivered, supported, and billed by Microsoft. So you can consume it as part of your Azure consumption plan. And the great thing about that as well is, you can manage it via the portal, should you wish, obviously, but it's a REST API-driven service, so it can be deployed and controlled programmatically, using ARM, Bicep, Terraform, or other tool sets that you wish to use to interact with the REST API. So Yeah, and it's really, it exists to enable the migration of those challenging workloads from on-premises.
Right.
The likes of SAP databases such as Oracle, SQL, which have that highly strung requirement for low latency and high throughput into Azure without the need to do any refactoring, architecting, or anything. You can essentially migrate as a lift and shift. And you'll remember this probably 4 or 5 years ago, this horrible phrase, art of the possible, and let's re-architect and let's cloud native everything. From this, the amount of 90% of the time, probably more than that, it's a lift and shift, let's migrate as is, and then do the refactoring, re-architecting, whatever, So ANF is a huge enabler to removing that blocker for performance requirements. It has, we have, this kind of 5 hero, what we call workloads, where we fit really well. I'd argue there's actually 6. SAP I've mentioned, Oracle, SQL, the databases. HPC, so high performance compute. I've done quite a bit of work with various customers around high performance compute. AVD, so VDI workloads, so Azure Virtual Desktop, or indeed, anything Citrix cloud fronted using AVD. Anything that requires FS Logics as profile management solution.
Right.
And the most recent one, back in November last year, Microsoft announced the general availability of Azure Netapps Files data stores. So for AVS. So AVS, Azure VMware Solution, it's HCI, so it's a hyper-converged compute platform, which is essentially stuff in a box. If you need more of anything, you're going to need more boxes, more nodes. And those nodes obviously had CPU, RAM, and storage. But most customers are more storage heavy in the requirement than they are in the RAM and the CPU. So to expand the storage, just adding nodes massively ramps up the cost, because believe me, these things aren't cheap.
Yeah, okay.
The NFS data store support for AVS to ANF has now basically decouples the storage requirement from the nodes, so customers can expand the storage independent of those nodes. And I've been working on several projects recently, and the savings, because there's a certain amount of architecture to support this as well. Things like ExpressRoute, you need a certain type of gateway, you need to enable FastPath to get the storage connected. Even with that, even adding that into the mix, the TCO, the savings that customers are seeing is quite compelling. I'm working on at the minute, and they've saved 50% by opting to use that route. And the great thing with ANF is because it is storage on demand. You can scale it, you can flex it, you can scale it up, you can scale it down, you can add more throughput, you can have more storage. And it's cloud economics. You're paying for what you're using. So those are the main ones. And the other one, the final one, is unstructured user data. So departmental shares, home folders, where customers are looking to move this, because it can't go to the likes of SharePoint or OneDrive for various reasons, compliance, security, etc. That's becoming quite compelling, and the storage is it's highly available. It's there. It's so simple to interact with, and I think one of the biggest things I always have to remind some of the salespeople I work with is you're no longer talking to storage admins. You're no longer talking to people who want to consume storage or manage storage. They just want to consume it. They don't want to be behind the curtain, twiddling knobs and keeping the lights on. They just want to consume it. They're developers, they're DBAs, they're people who don't understand storage. They don't care about storage. And that's the great thing about ANF. It's a very, very simplistic service to interact with. As I mentioned, you can deploy it via the portal, you can deploy it via programmatically via tool sets, Terraform, etc. So it's very, very easy to create, procure, and stand up. And I think it's one of the classic Microsoft, the ways they do things. If you think back to the PC, they democratized. Microsoft have a history of democratization. They democratized the PC. They brought it from the office into the home. They took the mainframe, democratized that down to the x86 platform, and brought the server platforms to more smaller, less wealthy and nimble companies. And with public cloud, look at Azure. I remember being involved with projects to do various things around analytics, which stretched into the millions before public cloud existed. So before you even started, there was a £2, £3, £4 million investment. And if you think about it now, you can hop into the Azure portal, stick your credit card in, and do whatever you want if your bank account's big enough, or if you're prepared to suffer it. But it's made that simple.
Yeah, very simple. Yeah. That's cool. You've answered half the questions I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you things like that's like 25% of the questions. So I was going to ask you things like how does it differ from Azure storage solutions? But I think you've probably covered most of that.
I think it is. I think that's a really good point. So Azure NetApp Files is file-based storage. Okay, yep. It supports NFS, CIFS, SMB protocol. There are other file storage options within Azure Files, as an example.
Yeah. And what's the main difference between these two then?
I think there's the main difference, and I think the reason why Azure NetApp Files exist: performance, performance, latency, throughput. The various SKUs for Azure Files, obviously you've got cool, hot, cold, transaction optimized, premium. They all fit in a place. I would argue that Azure NetApp Files comes in at the premium tier and then goes beyond that.
Beyond it, yeah.
I think things like the Azure Files offering, because it's a native Azure service, which Azure NetApp Files is, but the Azure Files service has a public endpoint. Azure NetApp Files doesn't have any public endpoint, and there are pros and cons for this.
Yeah.
But the great thing about no public endpoint, and we're talking about businesses that are or running their back end databases, applications, pretty important stuff, is you might not want it to have that public endpoint.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people would.
That is quite that's quite a big pro. I think the flexibility and the scalability of ANF. So Azure NetApp Files within the same service. Azure NetApp Files has 3 service tiers: standard, premium, and ultra, and they have differing throughput. So standard 16 megabytes per second of throughput, right up to the ultra tier of 128 megabytes per second of throughput per terabyte. And you can scale within the same service tier. You can create volumes, shrink them, grow them without any penalty. Over, for instance, Azure Files, if you wanted to grow a file share, you can grow a file share, but there's a 24-hour cooling off period before you can shrink it back down again. And also the limitation on performance within Azure file shares, I think it's 100,000 IOPS per file share, and I think you can burst. But with ANF, we can scale up to 450,000 IOPS, which it's pretty compelling. And if you think about the most popular, one of the biggest consumers of ANF is the SAP workload, and that's extremely highly strung, very latency sensitive, huge demand on throughput, and we can scale to meet that. And Azure NetApp Files is also the only storage solution in Azure certified for SAP S/4HANA databases.
Okay,
so
didn't know
that will tell you how performant it is.
Interesting.
I think other little minor things technically, like how it integrates with Active Directory for authentication. With the Azure Files offering, because it has a public endpoint, you're going to have to go through locking those down. There's PowerShell coding, etc. to do. Even to the point, if you look on the Microsoft Docs pages for Azure Files Active Directory integration, there's a video to show you how to do it. So if they have to put a video there, that tells me it's not that intuitive. Because ANF doesn't have the public endpoint and it hooks directly into the virtual network, providing you've got line of sight connectivity to domain controllers to resolve DNS, the IP connectivity is there, then you're golden, and it's very easy to work with.
So what sort of challenges do people have if it doesn't have a public endpoint?
Pardon?
What sort of challenges do people have if they've not got a public endpoint? So how do they get to the data if you wanted to share it or share a link to it or something?
Well, it has to be via the network because it's network attached storage. So it is a challenge. I mean, I know it's been acknowledged by the product team that there are certain use cases now where having those public endpoints or a way for other native Azure services to interact with the storage. Via that. At the minute, we don't have a method. There are some customers have got some workarounds where they're sort of connectors and proxies to do various things, but we don't have anything natively at the minute.
So I'm just going to go through questions because I'm just learning as we talk about this. So what about disaster recovery and business continuity? What does ENF offer in that kind of world?
Well, actually, quite a bit. So Azure NetApp Files, it's built on NetApp's technology. And NetApp has some really cool stuff. For instance, and snapshotting is a SnapMirror. Okay. So the ability to snapshot a volume, which is extremely quick, very lightweight. The snapshots are extremely efficient. So that is one way to, for instance, protect against maybe ransomware, to have the regular snapshotting policies to capture various points in times. It's also a great way for developers to clone volumes, to then take them away and test them for development purposes. But the other thing as well is we have a SnapMirror operation. So which in Azure NetApp Files is called cross-region replication.
Right. Okay.
That will create a replica of a volume to the partner region. So as an example, within the UK South to UK West.
Yeah.
So that's what we call SnapMirror. That's an asynchronous operation. You can set the intervals to be between 10 minutes, 1 hour, or 1 day. And it creates essentially a replica volume in the partner region.
That's cool.
But the great thing about that is to make, so that is asynchronous, and it's the target volume is read-only. But to make it writable, it's a simple case of breaking the mirror. And then that makes it writable more instantaneously.
Right, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So if you can fail over. What we also have now in public preview is cross-zone replication. So within the same region.
In the same region, yeah.
You can replicate between the zones where available, because obviously regions such as UK West doesn't have availability zones. And that's quite important, because I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot more customers now opt in for zonal protection over regional protection.
Yeah.
Primarily, I'm guessing for cost.
Yeah.
So having that ability to create zonal replicas is really important, because Azure NetApp Files, it's a highly available service over other Azure storage offerings. It offers 4 nines. It's only recently that Azure Files introduced 4 nines. I think it was May this year that Microsoft announced 4 nines SLA. So it's a highly available service, but it's not natively a zonal aware service. So you have the option when you create a volume to place a volume into a zone, but you don't have the option to, for instance, have zonal redundant storage.
Yeah, okay.
But that comes into the architecture. So how you architect your application, how you deploy it. So if you can pin volumes into zones, and then you can either choose to use the cross-zone feature to replicate the data, or indeed use the inbuilt application capability, something like HANA System Replication, Oracle Data Guard, to actually replicate the data.
It's definitely, the zone thing's definitely cost that we see anyway.
And also the other great thing about ANF in the BCDR space is Azure NetApp Files now has ANF backup policy. So within the service itself, it's not part of the Azure Backup Center, but within the ANF service, you can create a backup policy. And what that does, essentially, it comes along once a day, and it hoovers up the snapshots that you've created as part of your snapshot policy, and puts those into zero storage. So essentially, it takes them off of the ANF media and drops them into blob storage. And the great thing about this as well, I think historically NetApp customers will go, hang on a minute, that's got to be a license cost. There isn't any license cost. It's all consumption based. So you simply pay for the amount of storage you consume in the volumes, in the backup, in the replication has an associated charge for the replica, but it's quite small. So there's no licensing cost. You purely pay for the storage that you're consuming as part of your Azure consumption plan.
What about if you've got NetApps on-prem? How easy is it to migrate into NetApps in Azure?
Great question. Great question. So for Azure NetApp Files at the minute, there isn't any migration tool
to move in. Right.
Yeah. And I will say at the minute.
Okay. Well, not going to that, but okay.
However, you know, so NetApp has a wonderful professional services team that they're like the special forces of professional services. You know, they wheel them in and they're in and out, they get the job done, and they do a very good job. So NetApp does offer professional services for migration, and I know they have a tool they prefer as a migration tool, which is Datadog. However, customers I've been working with generally prefer to use tools such as for Linux, rsync, or good old-fashioned Robocopy for Windows. It's a tried and trusted method. The great thing with Robocopy is you can schedule it, you can QS it, you can hyper-thread it. You know, so being conscious on the time, because obviously those are file copies over the wire.
Yeah,
so,
that might take a while.
You know, I think one of the ones I did, I think, was 300 terabytes when I was involved with. I think it took 29 days on a 10 gig link.
Oh, wow. Is there no way to like send them a disk and get them to take the disk into the data center and plug it in?
Yeah, see, that's another great one. Is unfortunately the Azure Databox team doesn't support Azure NetApp files as a target. I have seen and heard of a hop method to Azure files to ANF through Databox for a real big heavy data lift, but it's not an official method, and again, it would involve professional services.
Got it. So is it, this might be the wrong thing to say, but is ANF more for customers with huge amounts of data, or would you just use it if you're looking for performance?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it's for the large data set. However, we do have customers that are running really large data sets.
Yeah.
Primarily, you know, the decision around Azure NetApp files. Yeah, well, I'll use one example. A customer is actually a good example of this. They had a very large data set. I think we're talking a region of 500 terabytes.
Oh, wow.
And there was another option for them to consider, which we did position with them, because NetApp also has a product called Cloud Volumes ONTAP CVO, which it's a third-party product which you can consume via the marketplace.
Okay.
But this customer had a strategy of cloud first, and I think this is important as well. They wanted native services. They didn't want that feeding, watering. They didn't want to manage something. So they opted, yeah, absolutely, because they want to modernize, they want to adopt. So they opted for ANF for this large data set. And I'll be honest, it's not the cheapest option. And if you show somebody the price of Azure NetApp files per gigabyte, they're going to go, "Wow, that's expensive." And then you say, "Well, is it?" And if you think about, with the other storage options, where you haven't got the flexibility, the simplicity of management, the lack of overhead of management, you might have to invest in some form of licensing. Then you're going to consider how you're going to back it up, how you can protect it, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Actually, the TCO starts to stack up really well, and this is what this customer did, and they proved. Even to the point they said we would have to hire 3 people to manage this solution.
Yeah. Well,
So so it is primarily used for those main workloads I said at the beginning. That's where we qualify and fit really well, and we add the value. But there are others. There's like an education platform called Moodle, which fits really well for us.
Moodle. I know Moodle very well.
Yeah. So there's we've got use cases where we fit really well with Moodle. In finance, there's an application which I've heard of, I'm not involved with, but called Murex, which again it fits quite well. But with those big financials, they move at the pace of a glacier. So to get anything done is difficult. But yeah, so I think it really does depend. And I think what's really important, don't just look at the product and the cost point of view. You really need to take a
lot of people do that though, don't they? A lot of people just look at cost and then don't really think about anything else.
Yeah, that's it. It's like, what do you actually need? It's no point going, it's like you go to a dealership to buy a Ferrari and you want it to do 200 mile an hour, and then you take it on the public roads and you can only do 70. So you probably shouldn't have bought that Ferrari if you want to,
Yeah, no, that's
so it's similar with ANF. ANF's the Ferrari here. You need to make sure you're going to get what you need out of it, get the value from it, and also the fact that it will fit, because Azure in general, people see it as this silver bullet to fix all their woes and their problems, and you'll know this probably better than anybody else. It has its foibles. It has these little
definitely.
niche things which trip you up along the way. So the due diligence, and this is really why Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework and the well-architected framework is so important to reference from the get-go, to make sure that you've covered all the steps correctly. You've done the due diligence, you've done the assessment. You understand, and especially with these with storage, understanding how the workload performs.
Yeah, I don't think too many people look at the Cloud Adoption Framework and things like that to begin with, because these kind of frameworks cover a lot of things that people just don't think about.
Yeah.
A lot of people just look at cost and go, well, that's that, let's go with that one. And that's not always a good idea. It's probably never a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, I actually saw, I was involved a few years ago with a large customer, and they opted to use Azure files over Azure NetApp files based on price.
Yeah.
And the service they chose to use was the hot tier, which has transaction billing associated to it.
Yeah.
The workload they run on was just unstructured user data files, departmental shares, home folders. And they got a bit of shock after their first steady state billing.
No, really?
Ironically, if they'd gone with Azure NetApp files, they would have saved 50% of what they would actually charge.
Oh, wow.
So these little assessments, and also how it performs. I've seen, people say, oh, we can run databases on this. Oh, yeah, we can. However, we need to understand how your application, how your database interacts, how it talks to the storage. I've seen some databases generating some random 100K block size, which just has a huge overhead on I/O, and it doesn't play well. So you've got to account for that, and then you might need to size accordingly to be able to produce.
Yeah, I must admit, my knowledge of storage isn't anywhere near. My knowledge of storage is not like at your level at all. I think I'm way down here.
Well, my friend, honestly, my knowledge of development and application like programming languages is way near yours.
So, are there any cost-saving strategies for NetApp?
Yeah, I mean, so one method we have, what we call dynamic volume shaping. I think if I'll use sort of VDI, AVD-based workloads, where if you think about the demand on the storage, start of the working day, say, I don't know, 8 a.m., 10 p.m., 10 a.m. in the morning. People coming to work, logging in, the systems are going to be a bit more stressed.
Yeah.
And then after that, you kind of drop down to that steady state, and then maybe there's a spike at the end of the day where profiles are being rewritten, etc. So by using this dynamic volume shaping, where you can scale those volumes and the throughput of those volumes to meet requirements, you can actually, you can gain and burst when you need it, and then when you don't, you can shrink them back down again. And obviously, that is going to massively impact your costs. There are a few things in the pipeline to also help with savings as well. Can't talk about them. I can just say
no, don't mention them.
Yeah, but and also I think if you look at the Azure NetApp Files standard service tier, which does do really good performance anyway, and you compare that to Azure Files Premium, it's actually cheaper than Azure Files Premium, and obviously because of that flexibility, all the other things you get built in, it is quite compelling. And I'm seeing more and more customers, because I think primarily because of this want to be cloud native, looking at ANF and saying this is the right service. We get involved in a lot of proof of concepts. Customers don't make these decisions lightly.
Yeah, I was going to say you must be doing a lot of
that. The proof of concepts, and again, something I have to remind some of our sales teams: these proof of concepts, they don't last a week anymore; they last months.
Yeah.
In large organizations, especially when you're talking about because it's storage, but it interacts across the network, and you need authentication. So then you need to talk to the networking team. You need to talk to the team that manages security. You need to talk to the team that manages perhaps the Active Directory. You need to, I've actually got a customer which has a company they employ to manage their DNS. So you've got 5 different organizations you need to interact with, plus all the change control, security protocols, all the other stuff you have to go through.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of this, and I think we do a good job of making sure. I think we do a good job of qualifying in or out quickly of whether or not the storage is right, it's the right service. And then if we do feel that it qualifies, then I think we do quite a good job in supporting going forward. Because I mean, I'm a pre-sales guy. I'm here for the pre-sales phase, but I do get involved post-sale occasionally as well. Because it's just cloud, isn't it? It's up and down, it's constant. There's all changes and everything else. So I think we do quite a good job of that.
How do you see the future of the hybrid cloud storage solutions? Do you think
Hybrid
it's things like
cloud?
Yeah.
Cool. I think if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a very rich man, and a lot higher up in the NetApp organization if I did. I think. I mean, my personal opinion, the hybrid point is key there. I can't see during my career or even probably lifespan the total lift out of data centers. I think
it's not going to happen.
The requirement for on-premises is going to remain for
Is
long.
It not? I'm pretty sure someone did a study and they reckon it was something like 70% is still on-prem and 30% is in cloud. Now, that's probably shifting, but it's still in favour of on-prem in a massive way.
Yeah, and I've and you might have seen this. I've seen a few customers retracting back.
Oh yeah,
primarily driven by cost.
Cost.
There's no argument for functionality because obviously the capability, the functionality is holes part for what you get on premises. Definitely. It is purely cost. Yeah. But I think the hybrid. I mean, I actually think NetApp has a really good strategy, a really good message around storage, hybrid or other. Because the company has a 30-year lineage in delivering file services, all that knowledge, experience, and capability. And NetApp's cloud journey has been going for a long time now. ANF is over 4 years generally available within the Microsoft platform. The CVO product, way beyond that. NetApp were really one of the leaders in delivering storage capability, file storage capability in the cloud. So we've got several tools within our portfolio. And NetApp is they're a global cloud-led data-centric software company, and that's what we are really. We're a software company. We're not a company that puts boxes into data centers. NetApp is founded on software. The ONTAP operating system, the Waffle file system. It's all software. So that's really where we are, and I think we've done quite a good job with that. And I think there is the challenge still, but coming from NetApp on premises. There's various things like cloud tiering, cloud backup services, which you can now consume from on-premises and offload into the cloud. So that's good. And I think that there's a probably not storage wars, but I think we're ahead of the game at the minute. There are competitors which are catching us up, but I definitely feel that NetApp's portfolio, NetApp's strategy, and what we're doing is definitely going the right way, and we're ahead of the game at the minute.
I always ask daft questions here, but who's your main competitor? Obviously, there's Azure storage, but who else is your competitors?
So for me, obviously, just being Azure focused, my competitor is, the online bookstore and the search engine.
Yeah.
If you know who they are.
Yeah.
For NetApp as a business, our biggest challenger in the industry, I would say, is Pure.
Pure. Okay.
Yeah, and we obviously compete against the likes of Dell and HP and as well. But I think for us in our particular area, Pure is the
Pure storage.
Yeah.
What kind of monitoring tools and kind of management tools have you got with ANF?
So, because it's cloud native, you've got the Azure Monitor, Azure Alerts, and Metrics, which are all built into the portal. I'll be honest, there is a challenge here because the Azure Metrics are only, they're only spat out every 5 minutes.
Right. Okay.
And 5 minutes in storage is like a Jurassic period. If you're trying to do any diagnostics, it's not great. However, NetApp does also have, conventionally Cloud Insights, which is a monitoring tool as well, which is a product part of the portfolio. But yeah, the monitoring within Azure for storage in general is challenging because of the limited cycle of the metrics being exposed.
Got it. So what challenges have you faced when working with ANF? Is there anything you've kind of come across that didn't quite work or things that need fixed?
I think the challenge is not necessarily with ANF itself. I think the challenge is with the workload you're looking to consume with ANF.
Right.
And getting that integration in. But I think what our product team are really good at is when customers come along with a specific use case and request is reacting to that and getting that adopted in to enable the workload. I was involved with one early doors back in just before the pandemic, early 2020, where there was a particular application which was a very basic application. It was actually, I think it was written in the 90s. And it relied on some PDF plugins or something. And at the time, the storage wasn't playing nice with it. But the product team got involved, spoke with the customer and the application developer, and basically introduced some changes in the back end to affect that. I think challenges, migration, that's one of the biggest challenges is getting the migrations done. Primarily time for that. I think there are a few maybe features which aren't there yet, which can pose challenges. The anti-ransomware and AV scanning is not currently inbuilt. That has been a large ask for customers to have that added, and I know it's been acknowledged. So sometime in the future, I'd imagine we would have that as well. However, you can still use a client-side third-party product for the AV work. And for ransomware, snapshotting, whilst it's not a ransomware protection, it is a really good way to protect against that because snapshots are immutable. So, you can create the snapshots, put them to one side. You've got a nice clean copy there. So having that regular cadence of your policy view snapshot to be created, that is a challenge. Backup was a challenge. Now we have the inbuilt backup policy. There are a few, but we generally. I work in a fantastic team of very clever people who've got all different skill sets.
What's your favourite part of your job?
Oh,
do you work remote just now?
Yeah, I do. So I work from home, but I'm going to because I'm in the European team, but I'm the only one in the UK now. I did have a buddy, but he's been moved to another team.
Right.
We have an office in Windsor, so craving social interaction, I go to the office once a week to have a chat. It's not far; it's about 60 miles away. But what's the best part of my job? I think the best part of my job is I really enjoy pre-sales. I really enjoy the customer conversations. And problem solving. Yeah, I think problem solving. No conversation's the same. Customers, environments, attitudes, opinions, strategies are all different. So I really enjoy that. I'm part of a fabulous team of people, very clever, very experienced and knowledgeable people with really good management above us. And that makes my life, my job easy because it is probably, I would say, one of the best teams I've worked within. And even though we're spread across Europe, at one point, my team stretched everywhere between Mexico City and Dubai and all the way in between. So we had a guy in Mexico City, a guy in Dubai. We've got people in France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Italy, all over the place. So with great capability, from background, long-term background in storage, working with various cloud vendors, all sorts. And the great thing is about it, we all get on really well, and we had a really good. We all went to Las Vegas this year for our.
How was that? I forgot to ask you about that. I know you were really excited to be going. How was that?
Yeah, that was fabulous. It's just like Disneyland for adults. it's just amazing.
Have you been before?
No, never. No.
I didn't realize you hadn't been.
No, my first time, and I really didn't know what to expect. We'd already been to the US back in April anyway for Seattle. Yeah. So going back again, it's a long old flight. I think it's 11 hours. But
was that that was an internal company thing, was it?
Yeah, it was our sales conference, our sales kickoff. And the best thing about that was eventually to meet all my team in person because I joined during the pandemic. I had met my manager once, but not the rest of the team. So to have the whole team together, we spent the whole week together. It was just fabulous, and just to. You meet people who are like, "God, you're tall," or "God, you're fat," or "You're losing your hair," and all that sort of stuff. It was just great banter, and obviously to do that in Vegas, with the wider NetApp family. It was a fabulous experience, and
how many people were there?
Oh, I can't remember. I think
What?
between 3,000 and 4,000. There was quite a few.
A lot of people. Yeah, it's a lot of people. And what did you think of Vegas itself? Did you enjoy Vegas itself?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I did. I did enjoy it. Is the upshot. I think I didn't commit enough time to exploring. I did have a great day. We had a free day on a Sunday, and a good friend of mine, one of the sales guys from the UK, we wanted to get out, so we got a taxi to the airport. We hired a convertible V8 Mustang.
Oh, nice.
Drove up into the desert, went up to the Hoover Dam, went around Red Rock Canyon, proper Thelma and Louise,
Which one are you?
And that was a fabulous day. And then the rest, I mean, we got out in the evenings and had a look around. There was a few places. I wanted to go to Fremont Street. I didn't get to go there.
What's that?
It's part of old Las Vegas. It's got it's got a covered roof. So the roof covers it, and apparently there's a zip wire that goes down the middle. It's
really
crazy. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Did you see any crazy things while you were there?
Yeah. Yes.
Lots of crazy things. What sort of crazy things that you can talk about?
I can't talk about them, mate. Well, I suppose, yeah. I mean, there was. Let's just say there were some characters.
Oh, there's always characters.
and we were in one of the casinos, and I had a breakfast meeting with one of the virtual teams on one of the mornings. So I was up quite early, about 6:30. Walked down to breakfast, and I walked past one of the gambling rooms, which is like the high rollers poker room.
Oh, okay.
And it was quite empty, but there was a few people there, and there was a guy sat in a bright red shirt at the end of one of the tables, and this was around about 6:30 in the morning.
Oh wow!
So then I went from breakfast to the conference. At lunchtime, I nipped back to my room. When I say nip, it was a half an hour walk, but I went back to my room to do some stuff. And when I walked past, he was still there.
Oh, crikey!
When I went back, he was still there. And then at the end of the day,
he was still there.
This was probably about 6 o'clock in the evening. He was still sat at the same table in the same place. And apparently, this particular room, the buy-in was a lot of money.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so that was interesting, And I'm not a gambler. The first time I've ever gambled was this year at a card table. At a card table, yeah. Because I wanted to do it. Yeah. Okay. So I went with a couple of mates. I sat at one of the blackjack tables, and I did the usual. Said to the dealer, I said, "Look, I've never done this before. I'm a total, newbie." And a very nice gentleman, a very patient gentleman. He said, "Don't worry." So I took $100 of chips. Took $100, and I sat down and I played for about an hour and a half. And I stood up and I walked away with $165.
No, that's all right.
Not massive, but I took some money off the house. So yeah, and actually the worrying thing is I really enjoyed it.
Wish I'd asked. Don't. Yeah.
But I mean, I know some of our guys went and they really enjoyed themselves with the gambling, and I think some of them did really well. But I mean, Vegas, I mean, fabulous. I think if I was going to go back there with family, I would probably do it over I'd probably have a long weekend. I wouldn't want to spend too long. Yeah, I think it would be nice as maybe on a part of a bigger tour.
Stop there and go somewhere else after it type thing.
Yeah, but no, wonderful experience. Very privileged to be able to have done that, and loved it.
And you're into biking, aren't you? You're a big motorbike guy. What sort of bikes have you got these days?
Yeah, I mean, motorcycles have been in 40 odd years of my life now, and that tells you how old I am. So currently I have a little Yamaha 10R700, which I use for riding on the road and traveling around a bit on. It's very basic, but such a lovely bike to ride. And you can do a bit of off-roading, because it's kind of that capable. You can get on the motorway and cover a few miles reasonably, and I think it does 65 to the gallon, so it's quite economical.
Oh, nice. Nice.
And then kind of the other end of the spectrum, and this one's my guilty pleasure. I've always been a fan of sports bikes, but bit of age, bit of a dodgy back, so having to be a bit more sort of sensible. Well, when I say sensible, anybody who knows about motorbikes is going to go, "That's not sensible."
Yeah.
So I now have a Ducati Street Fighter, which is the other end of the spectrum. You know, my Yamaha has maybe 70 horsepower. I think the Ducati has over 200 brake horsepower.
Oh wow!
And it's a fabulous thing to ride. It's just absolutely bonkers.
How long have you had that
for? I think I bought that back in April. So
yeah, because I'm sure it's been a bit like that time you were talking about buying it. So
yeah,
that's a guilty pleasure.
That's right. I was about to buy it when I got back from Seattle. Yeah.
So let's talk about Seattle. You're an MVP in Azure. How long have you been an MVP?
Oh, this is 1 year. So
This is your second year now.
So I was, well, no, actually, it's not a year because I was awarded on the 1st of September, but I've just had I had to do the renewal.
Ah, cool.
So I've got my my little disc turned off.
Yeah, nice. Don't drop it because they do break really easily.
Yeah, I've heard.
I dropped mine about that, and it just went. And I was like, oh, couldn't believe it. I bumped into you at the MVP Summit. Tell me all about your experience of going to Seattle and the MVP Summit and Microsoft.
Oh, where'd you start? I mean, wow. I really,
was that the first time you'd been to Seattle?
No, I had been to Seattle before. I was lucky enough. Back in 2018. I went to one of the Microsoft internal CSA boot camps.
Was that in the campus, or was that in a hotel somewhere? Or?
Yeah, no, that was in the same building where the conference was, in the conference center.
Got it.
I think they used to hold it in the Hyatt.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the MVP thing used to be in the Hyatt as well. Yeah.
The year that I went, it was in the conference center. So I was lucky enough to, because I was in the partner network at the time. And the partner that I worked with, I was invited to attend because I think Microsoft had a few gaps. So again, I was also lucky that a really good friend of mine who I used to work with, Mike Katonch, he was invited as well. So we synced up diaries and flights and hotels and basically had a ball in Seattle for a week. So I had been before, but obviously being an MVP for me is a little surreal because.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think if you looked at my background and my history, when I was my final year at school, I was very ill. I was bedbound for 9 months, so I missed all my exams.
Okay.
And back then, there wasn't any second chance. It was kind of like, tough luck, bugger off and go and find a job.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go to college and I wanted to study journalism. That was what I wanted to do.
Okay.
But because, with the lack of qualifications, you couldn't get accepted anywhere. And I grew up in Cornwall, so I had to get a job. And I grew up in a little Cornish fishing village and got a job working on one of the fishing boats.
What was your overall opinion of being an MVP? What did it mean to you when you became an MVP?
What did it mean?
Did you know anything about it? Because I didn't really know much about it when I first got it.
No, not at all. I think it was only after I met you in Orlando in 2019, and we were chatting about stuff you were there with Richard Hooper, and we were chatting about stuff, and it kind of went from there. Really, I've heard of it.
Heard of it. Nobody really knows what it is. Yeah.
But I think the more I looked into it, the more I thought, I'm kind of at the stage of my career now. I think the MVP, the program, the community is about support and giving back.
100%.
And I think I'm at the point in my career now where I've been around the block
a lot, and you can give it back.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing for me, because I've benefited over the years for MVP support, various things they've done, articles, blogs, videos, etc. And it's an opportunity for me to give back, and it was a real privilege because, like I said, I started as a fisherman, and then I got sick of getting up early in the morning and getting cold and wet, so I went and joined the military. I joined the Royal Marines, and then I quickly figured out I still had to get up early in the morning and get cold and wet, so I didn't really think that through. And then through family and commitments and everything else, I needed to find something else, so I literally fell into IT 20 odd years ago. So here I am. So for me, coming from there to essentially the MVP Summit in Seattle was quite a journey and a definite privilege. I kind of felt like I was the dumbest person in the room.
Yeah, I think me and you were a bit similar because I had no idea what to expect.
Mm.
Was
that your first in person?
Yeah. No, obviously there's ones that were virtual where it's a bit like Ignite. You go and learn all about the new stuff that's coming out and things like that. Obviously we can't really chat about it, but you go and learn about all the new stuff and you can meet everybody. But going and meeting everybody in person was just out of this world for me.
And I think that's the key. That is the key point. And what I will say is my experience from Seattle is everybody.
I got out of my way to know everybody though. Yeah. That's a skill I learned. I do like to know people. Yeah, it's good fun. I have this fear of going into a room, right, where there's 100 people and I don't know anyone. That's a genuine fear for me because I would be sat there and I'd be like, I wouldn't have anyone to talk about. So I go out of my way to try and know everyone so that doesn't happen. But people don't realise that. It's mainly that. It's the fear of going into a room and not knowing anyone. Because I used to be really shy. Got over that. But back then I would like go into a room and I would stand in the corner and not talk to anyone. I mean, even the other night there, the Azure user group on Wednesday, I struggle to speak to people that I don't know. So I try and I think that what's that?
I think that's probably a trait of people like us. One of the reasons, I'll be very honest and open. I've suffered with depression, and one of the methods that I was advised to use was focus and find focus for the mind, because I have to take what's in this head, the little box, and put it to one side, and then help with that. But that needs focus, and it needs something to occupy that, to keep that sort of
keep you busy.
And one of the things I didn't like to do, I'm not too bad at it now, but was stand up in front of an audience and talk.
Yeah, I'm still not good at that.
So, and also with technology, so that's where, when I started, because my blog started around about 2017. So that's when I started addressing that by writing, and it was a selfish thing to help focus the mind, but also to educate myself.
Yeah.
And then, when you got asked to go and talk at user groups, that was like, oh, Jesus Christ, really?
That's your blog there. Yep.
Thank you. Cheers. And then kind of forcing yourself to do that. But what that does is I kind of have OCD with everything. And I have to be prepared.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that.
So to make sure, for instance, if I'm going to do a talk at a user group, I'm prepared well in advance. I've gone through it all. I've understood it. And that focuses the mind. It sounds crazy that my happy place is work.
No, that's not that crazy. I think that's less crazy than you think, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but then the other happy place is whizzing around a race circuit on a motorbike north of 100 mile an hour. So that's where I really decompress. That's one key thing as well. And and to be able to now help and share, I think this is
I think that's the best part of being an MVP, is giving back to people. Yeah, I was always told by I had 3 jobs ago, I had a really good boss, and he's like, he would teach me stuff, and I was like, okay. And mostly valuable lessons, not like particular skills, but more valuable lessons that you can pass on.
Yeah.
I always think it's good to try and help other people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was, when I left the military and I sort of transitioned into civilian life, I went to college. I studied computer science, engineering, got myself up to some sort of standard level. And then I was working with a company which kind of put you through that scheme and then guaranteed you a job. If you see what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
And I actually got a job working for Siemens as a field engineer.
Oh, nice.
And I genuinely only think the reason I got that job is because I was popping straight out of the military. I had security clearance, and they didn't have to put me through that process. So, I got the job, and basically I ended up with a 2-man team, of what they call a floor walker and an engineer, me. And we were rolling around the country deploying a brand new network for the Ministry of Defence all over the country. And I have to say, I think I owe that man everything because of where I am now. He was a gentleman called Steve Tuffle, I've lost contact with him now, but he did move. He moved over to the US. But he guided me. He was kind of a mentor. But what I have to say, he had the patience of a saint.
Sometimes you need that.
Because we were doing some pretty important stuff. And I was
a little unsure.
Yeah. But he helped, he guided, he mentored, and he really set me on the right path, I think. And through my career, I've had some wonderful people I've worked with. Again, and I think the most important thing is people who care enough to nurture and guide. That's important. I have had other experiences where there's been people who are less patient.
Yeah, I think most people have come across that. Yeah,
but,
people with egos and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the ego thing I think is really big. That's a big thing. The ego thing. You know, I kind of have a mantra: just don't be a dick.
Yeah, same.
You know, just be a nice person. You know,
not a fan of people with egos. Yeah,
and I think that's what I love about the MVP side of it, and not necessarily the MVP thing itself, but the community.
Yeah, the community. Yeah, the people are really, really good. What was your highlight of the whole time in the MVP summit? If you,
it has to be the ice cream.
Yeah, so tell us about the ice cream, because we keep seeing tweets about this. Mine was the steak. The steak with the steak was really good, but the ice cream after it was
Yeah, so the steak was amazing. And I can't believe Thomas was whooping that down. He really enjoyed that, didn't he?
Never seen a boy eat so much food in all his life. It's like about 5,000 steaks.
Yeah.
And then he's like, can we go and get ice cream after it? And then,
But that ice cream was, I'm not quite sure what was amazing, the ice cream or the journey to the ice cream parlor in the back of that truck.
So for people who don't know, there's a guy called Josh Carlisle, and he's like, I've got a van, let's go and we'll find an ice cream shop. So we actually ended up on the island that Bill Gates owns.
Yeah,
that's where he lives.
Yeah,
Mercer Island or something like that.
Mercer Island, yeah.
Because I'm like, why are we going to cross a bridge? I'm pretty sure there's no bridge near here. And we're like, well, we're lost.
It was fabulous for Josh to take us there, and you know, like with Johnny and the guys, you know, and
Josh has moved to Seattle now, so I'm looking forward to seeing him.
Yes, he was saying, wasn't he, that he was going to be moving. Yeah, but you know, that ice cream was amazing. So that was great. I think, that the steak and the ice cream. Although I must admit, I think we had a bit of a blowout, or I had a bit of a blowout.
Oh yeah, the first night was good fun. Do you remember any of that? No.
No. Kenny, I blame Mr. Lowe for that.
Mr. Lowe, he's a legend. So Kenny Lowe was buying his drinks and just
Yeah, it was that was great. I think that it was the whole experience. You know, to do it, it's a massive privilege. And
would you go back next year?
100%.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not. I would pay for it myself. I would go out of my way just to go to that. It was a million times better than I was hoping.
Yeah, and I think the biggest plus for me, apart from being able to interact with the product teams, sit in and listen into some, let's say, really pretty cool stuff. To have the question and answer and the feedback and to be able to talk to them. Yep. I think the biggest thing was the ability to interact and network and meet new friends. Some very clever, helpful, friendly people.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. You know, I was a little bit starstruck because you're like, oh, there's Mark Masinovich, oh, there's Scott Guthrie, oh, there's Rick Close, oh, and it's like, oh, and then all the other MVPs you see, well, you know, it was a little bit kind of rabbit in the headlights at some point, but
yeah, but you'll get over that. You know, it's the first time forever. You're always a bit like, oh, first time I went to Ignite in Orlando, I was like, it's just like ridiculous. I've never seen anything like that scale. You know, that was the first big conference I've ever been to, and I was lost. I was like, this is huge. Yeah, I'm glad you're going to go back next year. Hopefully,
yeah, 100%. I'm already working on how we're going to get there. Cool. It's one of those things that you know, not many people get to do.
Yeah, I always try and say to people who aren't MVPs that are thinking about it, do whatever you can to become an MVP. Just give back to the community, and it will happen.
Definitely.
The summit was 12 out of 10 for me.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, when we did Orlando in 2019, you know, I think my watch told me I walked the best part of 50 miles that week.
Yeah, that was a lot of walking,
but it was worth it.
Yeah,
it was definitely.
So normally, last question I've got for you: any holidays planned? Well, you did say to me you're on holiday now. What you got planned?
Yeah, so not much because grandfather.
So just relax and go and spend some time with the new grandfather.
Yeah, so going to. So my daughter lives about 150 miles away, so we're going to go spend some time. We were there last week. I'm going to go spend some time. We did have a plan to go to Italy, but because of the granddaughter making an early appearance, we've kind of sort of put that to a side now. So yeah, I think sort the garden out because I've got a habit of killing grass and not growing it.
So the trick to grass is, see, when you need to wait till it's a certain length before you cut it.
Yeah,
well, I know that because my good friend at the golf bought a new house and got some grass and cut it when it was about this height, and he killed it all because the roots weren't long enough. So there's a wee tip for you.
Well, I made the mistake. Somebody said get some weed killer and put this weed killer on it because we had quite a few weeds growing. So I got the weed killer, and there's a real irony here. I got the weed killer, killed the weed, amazing, but it killed about a foot diameter of grass around it. Okay, and this is the hilarious bit. What's growing in that dead grass patch now? Bloody weeds.
Weeds always come back. Yeah, you can't get rid of them.
Yeah. So next week's going to be spend some time with the family, fix the garden, and hopefully get out and ride my bike a bit.
Ride your bike a bit. Well, hopefully the weather's good. Listen, thank you very much for coming on. So if people want to reach out to you, the best place to get you is probably Twitter. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yep. So reach out to Anthony on Twitter, and his blog is this one, blog.mashford.com. Thank you very much for coming on, dude. Hopefully we'll get to bump into each other. Ignite, maybe?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I really do.
Same. So fingers crossed.
Maybe if you want to chat on Azure Netapps files at the Glasgow user group, I could make my way north. I'll come up.
Yes. Yes. What about October?
October.
Or maybe next year. October or next year.
So unfortunately, October we've got the South Coast Summit.
What about February? In fact, I'll speak to you near the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be brilliant actually if you could come up.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Yeah, definitely. No, because me and Sarah are organising it turnabout. So every 4 months, I'm organising it. So yeah, we'll do that.
All right,
listen, brilliant. Just before you go, later tonight, I'm joined by Deepthi Guru. We'll be chatting about Azure SQL and quite a bit more. That's at 9 o'clock. So hopefully you can join us in an hour. Anthony, thanks again for coming on. Don't leave because I'll chat to you in 2 seconds, but I'm just going to play the wee outro video. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you in an hour's time.